I want to tell you about the moment a stranger handed me a small black device, no bigger than a thumb, and said, very quietly, very carefully, that I might want to sit down before I looked at what was on it. I did not sit down. I looked at it standing in the middle of my own kitchen, in the house I had lived in for 3 years, in the home I thought I knew completely. And what I saw on that tiny screen changed everything I believed about my marriage, my mother-in-law, and the woman I had been trying so hard to become. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. My name is Nora Dalton. I'm 27 years old, and for 3 of those years, I have been married to a man named Garrett. Charming, steady, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and held doors open and called his mother every Sunday without fail. That last detail, I would come to understand, was more significant than I realized. Garrett's mother was named Vivian, and Vivian was, how do I put this carefully, a woman with a very clear idea of how the world should be arranged, and a very low tolerance for arrangements that deviated from her vision. She was elegant in the way that certain older women are elegant, the kind of elegant that functions partly as armor and partly as a weapon, deployed with precision when needed and holstered just as precisely when it wasn't. She had not wanted Garrett to marry me. She had not said this directly. Vivian never said anything directly if she could arrange for it to be understood through other means. But she had communicated it through 3 years of small, consistent, perfectly calibrated gestures. The way she corrected my table settings at family dinners, the way she asked about my career with the specific interest of someone who found the answer disappointing, the way she talked to Garrett in the kitchen when she thought I was upstairs, in a low and urgent voice that stopped the moment I appeared in the doorway. I had spent 3 years trying to win her over. I had baked things for family gatherings. I had asked about her garden. I had listened to stories about Garrett's childhood with genuine attention and remembered the details, bringing them up later in ways that showed I had been paying attention. I had done everything a person does when they want to be accepted by someone who has decided, before they walked in the room, not to accept them. It had not worked. But I had kept trying because I loved Garrett and because I am, at my core, the kind of person who believes that patience and kindness can move most things, given enough time. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined, was that Vivian had been doing something in my home, something that had nothing to do with table settings or kitchen conversations or disapproving questions about my career, something that a repairman named Dale was about to find behind my bathroom mirror on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I had called Dale because the bathroom faucet had been dripping for 2 weeks. Garrett kept saying he would fix it and kept not fixing it, which was a small pattern I had learned to manage by simply handling things myself. Dale came highly recommended by my neighbor Carol, who said he was thorough, honest, and did not overcharge, which in my experience was a description that fit approximately 11% of repairmen and was therefore worth acting on immediately. Dale arrived at 2 p.m, toolbox in hand, the kind of man who looked exactly like what he was, a person who had spent 30 years fixing things and had developed a calm, methodical approach to the world that I found immediately reassuring. He was in his late 50s, wore a blue work shirt with his name embroidered on the pocket, and shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who meant it. I showed him to the bathroom and left him to it. I went to the kitchen to work. I do freelance graphic design, which means I am always technically working, and also always technically available to be interrupted, a paradox I have never fully resolved. Dale was in the bathroom for about 40 minutes, longer than I expected for a faucet, but I assumed there was something behind the wall that had complicated matters. There usually is with old houses. What I did not expect was the knock on the kitchen door frame. The way he was standing when I looked up, very still, toolbox at his feet, something in his right hand that he was holding carefully, away from his body, like a thing he wasn't quite sure what to do with. He said he had found something behind the mirror when he opened up the wall cavity to check the pipes. He said he thought I should know about it before he said anything else. He said he was sorry and that he meant it, and that whatever I decided to do next was entirely my business, and he would understand completely. Then he held out his hand. It was a small black device, rectangular, a lens on one end, barely visible, the size of a pinhole. A camera. Installed behind my bathroom mirror, pointed through a gap so small I would never have noticed it, angled to capture the room, my private space, in my own home where I had lived for 3 years believing I was alone. I stood in my kitchen holding that device for a long time, and the first thought I had, the very first thought before anything else was, Vivian. Dale stayed. I want to say that first because it mattered. He could have handed me the device and left, could have said it wasn't his business and gone back to his truck. Instead, he sat at my kitchen table while I stood at the counter, and he said that he had found things in people's homes before, in 30 years of repair work, and that in his experience, the most important thing in that first moment was not to do anything fast. He was right. I knew he was right. I was also standing in my kitchen, holding a hidden camera that someone had installed in my bathroom without my knowledge, so my ability to move slowly was being tested considerably. I made tea. It was the only thing I could think of to do with my hands. I made 2 cups and set one in front of Dale, and we sat across from each other, and I tried to think clearly. The device was small and professional looking, not something you bought at a hardware store. Dale said he had seen similar ones before, not in homes, he clarified quickly, but in a news story he had read. He said they were used for surveillance. He said they had memory built in, or connected to something external, and that whatever had been recorded was probably still on it. I did not look at it then. I could not yet. What I did instead was think about Vivian. 3 years of small, consistent hostility assembled itself in my mind with a new and terrible clarity. The way she had access to our home. Garrett had given her a key 2 years ago for emergencies, a decision I had felt uncertain about, but had not objected to because objecting would have confirmed every suspicion she had about me. The way she had been inside while we were away the previous spring. She had watered our plants while we were on a trip, a favor I had thanked her for. The way she sometimes arrived before I was home from work and was already in the house when I got there, always with some small domestic justification. Dropping off food, returning a dish. All of those visits assembled themselves now into something that looked completely different than it had before. She had had opportunity. She had had motive. 3 years of wanting evidence that I was not good enough for her son, that I was somehow wrong for him, that their marriage should be reconsidered. A camera in the bathroom could capture anything. Arguments, behavior, moments of vulnerability. Anything she could take to Garrett and say, look at who you married. I called my friend Simone from the kitchen while Dale finished his tea. Simone was the kind of friend who answered on the second ring, regardless of what she was doing, who listened without interrupting, and who, when I had finished telling her what Dale had found, said 3 words, "Do not move." She arrived in 20 minutes. Simone worked in HR. She was very good at situations where something had gone wrong and needed to be handled correctly. She looked at the device with the focused attention of someone making an assessment, asked Dale several very specific questions about where exactly it had been positioned and how it had been installed, and then looked at me and said we needed to document everything before we did anything else. We documented everything. Dale helped. He marked the location in the wall, photographed it, wrote a brief description of what he had found and how. He signed it. He said if I ever needed him to confirm what he had found, he would. He said it simply, the way some people offer help, like it was just the obvious thing to do. I think about Dale a lot still, about the fact that he was a stranger who showed up to fix a faucet and ended up doing something much more significant than that. Simone took the device to a friend of hers, a man named Terrence who worked in IT security and owed her a favor, the nature of which she declined to specify. He confirmed it was a surveillance camera with internal storage. He confirmed it had been recording. He said the footage could be retrieved. We retrieved it that evening at Terrence's apartment on his laptop screen. Simone sat beside me. I watched the footage. The camera had been recording for 4 months. 4 months of my bathroom, my most private space. Every morning, every evening, every ordinary moment of a life I had believed was mine and private and unobserved. I watched for about 10 minutes before I had to stop. But in those 10 minutes, I saw enough to understand something that reoriented everything. The camera was not pointed at me. Or rather, it was not only pointed at me. The angle was wider than I had realized, wide enough to capture the full room, wide enough to capture both sides of the vanity, wide enough to capture someone standing at the sink who was not me. And in the footage from a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, that someone was Garrett. Garrett, on his phone, speaking quietly, turned slightly away from the mirror, the way a person turns when they are trying to be private. Smiling the specific smile I had seen on his face in our early months together and had not seen in some time. Smiling at someone who was not me. I sat in Terrence's apartment, and the whole architecture of what I had believed rearranged itself around me. And then, slowly, a question replaced everything else. If Vivian had installed this camera, and I still believed she had, and the camera had captured this, what exactly had Vivian been trying to find? I did not sleep that night. I lay in the bed I shared with Garrett and listened to him breathe and thought about the footage and thought about the camera and thought about Vivian and tried to find the shape of something that kept shifting every time I got close to it. By 3 a.m, I had arrived at a theory. By 4, I had talked myself out of it. By 5, I had talked myself back in. The theory was this. Vivian knew. Not about me, about Garrett. The thought had arrived quietly, the way important thoughts sometimes do, not with a flash, but with a slow, settling weight, like furniture being moved into its correct position. Vivian had been inside our home. Vivian had installed the device. Vivian had access, opportunity, and 3 years of watching her son in a marriage she had opposed. But what if her opposition had not been about me at all? What if she had seen something in Garrett, something I hadn't seen or hadn't let myself see, and had decided to collect evidence of it, not to protect me. Vivian did not want to protect me, but possibly to protect herself, or to have leverage, or because she was the kind of woman who collected information the way other people collected insurance policies, quietly against a future need. Simone, when I called her at 6 a.m, was already awake. She listened to the theory. Then she said, that would explain the angle. The camera had been installed in a position that captured the full room, not just the area where I typically stood. If someone had wanted to surveil me specifically, they would have angled it differently. The position made more sense if the target was the room itself, or anyone who used it, or a specific person who used it at a specific time. Garrett's routine was different from mine. He got up earlier, used the bathroom before I was awake. If Vivian knew his schedule, and she did, she had always known his schedule, in the specific way of a mother who had been tracking her child's patterns for 30 years, she could have positioned the camera to capture him in the mornings, when he thought he was alone, when he made phone calls he didn't want overheard. I drove to Terrence's apartment at 7 and asked him to go through the footage more carefully. Not all of it. I could not watch all of it, not yet. But the morning segments, the times between 6 and 8 when Garrett was up and I was still asleep. Terrence went through it methodically, the way he did everything. It took 2 hours. What he found in the morning footage was a pattern. Garrett, 3 or 4 mornings a week, on his phone. Always turned away from the mirror. Always speaking quietly. Always with that specific expression, focused and warm in a way that had an obvious direction. The footage did not have audio, but it had timestamps, and the timestamps told their own story. If you're listening to this and you've ever had the feeling that everything you thought you knew was actually a set you'd been living in, I see you, and I'm so glad you're here. If this story means something to you, a like and a subscription would mean the world to me. It's what keeps these stories coming. Terrence also found something else. In the footage from a Saturday 6 weeks ago, a Saturday when Garrett and I had both been out, when the house had been empty, the camera had captured something unexpected. Someone entering the bathroom. Not Garrett, not me, a woman, moving through the frame purposefully, checking something near the mirror, then leaving. On screen for less than 40 seconds, clear enough to identify. Vivian. She had come while we were out. She had accessed the house with her key, and she had checked the camera, adjusted it slightly from the look of the movement, and left. She had been maintaining it, actively, for months. I sat in Terrence's apartment and felt something crystallize inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder and more useful than anger. Clarity. I called Simone. I told her what we had found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, now we need to think about what we do with this." Because here was the thing. Here was the complicated, delicate, crucial thing. I had footage of Garrett that I did not yet fully understand. I had footage of Vivian maintaining a hidden camera in my home. I had evidence of surveillance. I had questions I did not yet have answers to. And somewhere, possibly, Vivian had footage too. Whatever she had downloaded from this camera before Dale found it, she had it. She had been building something, and I did not yet know what she intended to do with it. I needed to know before she moved. I had 3 days before Garrett was due back from a work trip. 3 days to understand what I was dealing with. I used every one of them. The first thing I did was call an attorney. Not because I was ready to make any decisions, I wasn't, but because I needed to understand what I was holding. Simone recommended someone she knew from a professional context, a woman named Patricia Hale, who practiced family law and had, according to Simone, a gift for seeing situations clearly when the people inside them could not. Patricia Hale met me the next morning. She was in her early 60s, wore her silver hair short, and had the manner of someone who had heard a great many things and found very few of them surprising. She listened to me describe the camera, the footage of Vivian maintaining it, and the footage of Garrett on his phone, without interrupting once. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. They were very specific questions. Then she said, "All right, here is what you have." What I had, legally, was significant. The installation of a hidden camera in a private residence without the knowledge or consent of the residents was illegal in our state. Vivian had committed a crime. The footage of her maintaining the camera was evidence of that crime. Whatever footage she had collected and taken with her was obtained illegally. What I also had, she said more carefully, was a personal situation that was separate from the legal one, and that only I could decide how to handle. She said this with the particular delicacy of a woman who understood completely what I had seen in that footage, and was not going to make me say it out loud until I was ready. I appreciated that. Over the next 2 days, Simone and I built a clear picture of what had happened and when. Terrence dated the camera's installation to approximately 4 months ago, consistent with the period when Garrett had been traveling frequently for work, and Vivian had been in our home twice, both times with reasonable justifications. One of those visits had been a Saturday. The Saturday 6 weeks ago on the footage was not the first time she had accessed the camera. It was simply the first time the camera had caught her doing it. She had been careful, but not careful enough. I also, in those 3 days, paid attention to things I had been paying attention to for months without fully registering what I was seeing. The phone that Garrett kept face down on the table. The business trips that had become more frequent in the past year. The way he had seemed, lately, slightly elsewhere, present in the room, but oriented somewhere outside of it, the way a compass needle points away from where you're standing. I had noticed these things. I had filed them in the folder that people keep for things they are not ready to look at directly, a folder I had apparently been adding to for some time. I looked at it now, directly, all of it. It did not make me feel better, but it made me feel clear, which was more useful. When Garrett came home on Thursday evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner. I had set the table. I had opened a bottle of wine. I was, from the outside, completely composed. The way you are composed when you have spent 3 days preparing for a conversation and you know exactly how it is going to go. He came in, kissed my cheek, set his bag down, said the trip had been exhausting, asked what smelled good. I handed him a glass of wine and told him we needed to talk. The conversation that followed was long and painful in the way that true conversations are long and painful. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest in the particular way that honesty lands when there is nowhere left to hide. I showed him the photographs of where the camera had been found. I showed him the footage of Vivian maintaining it. I did not show him the other footage yet. I wanted to see what he said first, without it. He said he had not known about the camera. His shock looked real, the specific shock of someone confronting their mother's actions, which is different from the shock of being caught. He went very pale. He said her name in a way I had not heard him say it before, quietly, with something in it that sounded like the end of something. I believed him. About not knowing about the camera, about that specific thing, I believed him completely. It was the other thing, the thing I had not yet raised, that was still waiting. I told him there was more footage. I told him I had seen it. I told him I needed him to tell me, before I showed him anything, whether there was something he wanted to say to me. He looked at me for a long time, and then he told me. The conversation with Garrett lasted until 2 in the morning. I will not describe all of it. Some things belong only to the people who lived them, and the details of what he told me that night are in that category. What I will say is that he told me the truth, all of it by the end. Not immediately and not easily, but completely. He had been having an affair for 8 months. It was over. He said this, and I believed it was true, though the timing of its ending told its own quiet story. He had ended it 6 weeks ago. Around the time, I noted internally that Vivian had been seen on the footage adjusting the camera. That coincidence sat with me. I filed it carefully. In the days that followed the conversation with Garrett, I made decisions. They were not fast decisions. I am not a fast decision person, which had been noted as a flaw by various people throughout my life, and which I have come to understand is actually just how I am built. I take things in at my own pace. I sit with them until they settle, and then I know. What I knew was this: my marriage was over. Not because of the affair alone, though that would have been enough, but because of the architecture beneath it. The 3 years of a man who loved his mother more than he had ever managed to love his wife, who had given her a key to our home and our privacy, and it turned out, our marriage itself. The 3 years of feeling like a guest in my own life. I was not angry at Garrett in the way I had expected to be. I was something quieter and more definitive. Done. What I had not yet decided was what to do about Vivienne. Patricia Hale had laid out my options clearly. I could pursue legal action for the illegal surveillance. It was a strong case. I could use the footage as leverage in divorce proceedings. I could do both. I could also do neither and simply leave, which was also a valid choice and one she would support completely if I made it. But something had been sitting with me since Terrence first showed me the footage of Vivienne in the bathroom that Saturday. Something about the angle of her adjustment to the camera, the specificity of it. I asked Terrence to look at something. I asked him to map the camera's field of view precisely, where it was pointed, what it could capture, what it could not. He did this carefully, using the footage as reference. The camera's primary angle, he confirmed, was not the area of the bathroom I used most frequently. It was the area of the vanity where Garrett stood in the mornings, the area where he made his phone calls. Vivienne had known, or suspected, and she had pointed the camera not at me, not to gather evidence against me, not to prove I was wrong for her son, but at her son, to capture what he was doing when he thought no one was watching. The question was why. I called Patricia. I told her what Terrence had found about the angle. I asked her what it meant, legally and practically, that the camera appeared to have been positioned to surveil Garrett rather than me. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, It means she was building a case, not against you, against him. We looked at this from every direction. Vivienne had a key to the house. She had installed surveillance equipment. She had maintained it actively for 4 months. She had collected footage of her son during what appeared to be private phone calls. And 6 weeks ago, right around the time the affair ended, she had adjusted the camera. Had she already downloaded footage? Had she shown Garrett something? Had the ending of the affair been Vivienne's doing, the result of a conversation we didn't know about, conducted with evidence we hadn't seen? I thought about Garrett's face when he had told me the affair was over. The timing, the 6 weeks. I called Simone. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Nora, she wasn't protecting you. She wasn't even protecting him. She was protecting her leverage over him." And that was when everything clicked into place. Vivienne had not installed that camera to help anyone. She had installed it to have power. Power over a son she had always needed to control, whose marriage she opposed, whose independence from her she had been managing for years. The affair had been her opportunity, not to end it, not to protect me, but to hold it, to have something over Garrett that she could use whenever she needed to remind him where his loyalties should lie. She had been watching her own son, building a case against him, planning to use it, not to expose him, but to own him. And a handyman named Dale had found the camera before she could. The Sunday after I understood all of this, I drove to Vivienne's house. I had not told Garrett I was going. I had told Patricia, who had said to be careful and to record the conversation if I legally could, which in our state I could. I rang the doorbell. Vivienne answered in the particular way she always answered doors, composed, slightly regal, the expression of someone who considered unannounced visits a mild imposition. She looked at me, then at my face, and I saw, for the first time in 3 years, something move across her expression that I had never seen there before. Uncertainty. I said I had something to show her. I said I thought we should sit down. I said it in the calm, measured voice of someone who has spent 3 days preparing for this conversation and knows exactly what comes next. I showed her the photograph of the camera. I showed her the footage of her maintaining it. I told her I knew exactly where it had been pointed and what it had been designed to capture. I told her I knew about the timing of the affair's ending and what I believed about her role in that. And then I told her what was going to happen next. She sat very still across from me. The composure was still there. Vivienne's composure was architectural, load-bearing. But underneath it, something had shifted. She was recalculating. I could see her doing it. She said I couldn't prove anything beyond what the footage showed. I said the footage showed her entering my home without permission and accessing an illegal surveillance device she had installed. I said that was sufficient. I said Patricia Hale agreed. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you want?" And I told her. What I wanted was straightforward, and I had thought about it carefully. I wanted the divorce to proceed without interference. I wanted Vivienne to make no contact with me during the proceedings, to offer no commentary to family members, mutual acquaintances, or anyone else about the nature of our marriage or its ending. I wanted her key to my house returned immediately. And I wanted a written acknowledgement, not a public one, not something that would go to court unless it had to, that she had accessed my home and installed the device. I was not asking her to confess publicly. I was not asking for an apology, though one would have been appropriate. I was asking for her to step back, completely and permanently, from a situation she had created. In exchange, I would not pursue legal action for the illegal surveillance. Patricia had been clear with me about this decision. She had said I had a strong case and could pursue it fully if I chose to. She had also said that sometimes the goal is not the maximum outcome, but the right one, the one that gets you out and forward and free. She said both paths were valid and that only I could decide which one served me. I had decided. Vivienne considered it for a long time. I let her. I was not in a hurry. I had tea at her kitchen table. She had made it automatically out of some deep social reflex that functioned even in a crisis, which I found both absurd and oddly human. And I waited. She agreed. She did not do it gracefully. There was no moment of reckoning in her eyes, no acknowledgement of what she had done beyond the legal minimum. Vivienne was not a woman who did graceful reckonings. But she signed the written acknowledgement Patricia had prepared. She returned the key that afternoon, dropped through my mail slot in an envelope with no note, which was both typical of her and somehow perfect. What I had not anticipated, and what made everything significantly more complete, was what happened in the weeks that followed. Vivienne, it turned out, had not been as discreet as she believed. The friends she had been cultivating for 3 years, the women in her social circle who had heard, in careful, plausibly deniable ways, that Garrett's wife was not quite right, not quite enough, not quite what the family had hoped for, began to hear a different story. Not from me. I said nothing publicly. From Garrett. Garrett, to his complicated credit, told the truth when people asked. He told his closest friends what had happened. He told his own sister, who had always been cooler toward me than I deserved, and who called me after hearing it to say she was sorry, in a voice that sounded like she meant it. He told people, quietly and without drama, that the marriage had ended because of his own choices, and that I had handled everything with more dignity than he had deserved. That last part traveled. Things do in social circles. It traveled back to Vivienne's friends, who began to look at 3 years of her careful commentary about me with new eyes. The story she had been building about her daughter-in-law, the wrong one, the not enough one, collapsed under the weight of its own architect. Vivienne had spent 3 years managing her son's marriage from the outside. She had installed surveillance equipment in my home to maintain control over a situation she had never accepted. And in the end, the person whose reputation had been damaged was not mine. Carol, my neighbor who had recommended Dale, stopped me on the sidewalk one morning to ask how I was doing. She knew something had happened. Neighbors always know something has happened, even when they don't know exactly what. She said she was glad Dale had been helpful. She said he was a good man. I said he was. I said he had found something I hadn't been looking for, and that it had turned out to be exactly what I needed. She nodded thoughtfully and said that sometimes that was how it worked. I called Dale to thank him properly a few weeks after everything had settled. He answered on the second ring. I told him that what he had found had changed my life and that I was grateful for the way he had handled it, carefully, honestly, without making any of it bigger or more dramatic than it needed to be. He said he was glad it had worked out. He said the faucet was fixed too, by the way, in case I had forgotten. I had, in fact, completely forgotten. We both laughed. I moved out of the house in November. I found an apartment on the other side of town, on the 3rd floor of a building with good light and a small balcony where I put 2 plants and a chair. I set up my design work at a desk by the window. I learned, slowly and imperfectly, what it felt like to be in a space that was entirely mine, where every object had been chosen by me, where no key existed that I hadn't made myself, where the silence was just silence and not the absence of something that should have been there. The divorce was finalized in February. It was not a hostile process. Patricia had been right that getting what you need is not always the same as getting the maximum. We divided things fairly. Garrett was quiet and decent throughout, in the way of someone who understood they had forfeited the right to be anything else. I did not hear from Vivienne. I did not expect to. Spring came into my 3rd floor apartment the way it comes into places that face east, early and with conviction. The light hit the balcony plants first, then the desk, then the floor in a long, warm stripe that moved across the morning as I worked. I had gotten 2 more clients since the move, both through referrals, which meant my work was building the way good things build, through other people's trust passed along. I had been thinking about what to make of everything. Not obsessively, I was past that, but in the quiet, turning over way that happens when something significant has moved through your life and left you standing in a different place than you expected. Here is what I had come to. Vivienne had spent 3 years in my life trying to have power over it. She had been careful and strategic and in her own way thorough, more thorough than I had known, which was saying something. She had installed surveillance equipment in my home. She had collected footage. She had managed her son through a mixture of influence and, I now believed, quiet pressure that he had never fully named or resisted. She had built an architecture of control that she believed was invisible. And a man named Dale, who came to fix a faucet on a Tuesday afternoon, had found it behind a mirror. I think about that a lot, about the randomness of it. If the faucet hadn't dripped, if I hadn't called, if Dale had been less thorough, less honest, the kind of repairman who fixes the specific thing and doesn't notice anything else. If any one of those small things had been different, I might still be in that house, still baking things for family gatherings, still trying to earn acceptance from a woman who had never intended to give it. There is something both terrifying and comforting about that thought. Terrifying because it was so close. Comforting because the ordinary world, the world of dripping faucets and reliable repairmen and neighbors who give good recommendations, had, in this case, done exactly what it should. It had shown me something true. The twist, the thing that I had not understood until nearly the end, was that Vivian's camera had never really been about me. I had been so certain in those first hours that her surveillance had been aimed at proving something against me. 3 years of hostility had prepared me to believe that. But the camera had been pointed somewhere else, at someone else, for reasons that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with a woman who needed to control what she could not simply ask for. She had been watching her own son, building leverage over him, and in doing so, she had captured the truth about his marriage, not the truth she had been trying to construct, but the actual one. Garrett had told me once, early in our relationship, that his mother had always known everything before he said it. He had said it with the particular mixture of pride and exhaustion that people use when they describe something they have lived with so long they have stopped questioning it. I had thought at the time that it was a sweet thing about their closeness. I understood now what it actually was. Control dressed up as devotion is still control. And the thing about control is that it eventually collapses under its own weight, because you cannot surveil your way to a relationship. You cannot install cameras in the spaces where people should be able to be themselves and call what you capture love. My mother called me in March. She had heard through the slow movement of family news that the marriage had ended. She asked how I was. I told her, honestly, that I was better than I expected to be. She said she had always thought I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. I said I had had a lot of help. She said that was what strength looked like, knowing who to call. I thought about Dale, about Simone, about Terrence and Patricia and Carol and all the ordinary people who had, in ordinary ways, handed me exactly what I needed at exactly the right moment. I thought about a small black device, no bigger than a thumb. I thought about how the person who had installed it had meant it to give her power over others, and how, in the end, it had given me power over nothing except my own life, which, it turned out, was the only power worth having. Some people build walls. Some people build cameras. Some people build elaborate, patient structures designed to keep other people small. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a faucet drips, a repairman shows up, and the whole structure comes down. Not with noise, not with drama, just with the quiet, ordinary, unstoppable force of the truth being seen. That is enough. That has always been enough.